They thought she was just another face in the crowd, someone to dismiss, to remove, to silence before anyone noticed. She wasn't loud. She wasn't reckless. She didn't have to be. It was the skin she was in, the quiet confidence she carried, that made her a threat in their eyes. A decision was made in a blink, without questions, without proof. She was cornered, humiliated, paraded like a warning. And while the crowd stared, while whispers turned into headlines, no one bothered to ask the most important question. Who is she really? Because behind the shame they tried to brand her with, behind the arrest that should have ended her, was the one woman capable of flipping the system that betrayed her. This isn't the story they expected. This is the story they'll never forget. Like what you're hearing. Smash that like button, subscribe for more, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and how you think this ends? The late afternoon sun filtered through the towering glass canopy of Hamilton Ridge Mall, casting golden rays across the polished marble floors and gleaming storefronts. At the heart of a luxury wing, among brand names worth small fortunes, a solitary figure stood with quiet composure near Varelli's fine jewelers. Kendra Mayfield wasn't doing anything disruptive. She wasn't on her phone, wasn't pacing, wasn't bothering anyone. Dressed in a belted trench coat over a navy sheath dress and low-heeled shoes, she looked like any other professional woman. Confident, self-possessed, intentional. Her hands clutched her phone as she glanced at the digital screen. 5:27 p.m., 3 minutes before her scheduled pickup. Across the concourse, a pair of security officers surveyed the crowd. The taller one, Clint Dobson, had an unmistakable swagger, the kind that came with authority long abused. His buzz-cut, rigid stance and mirror sunglasses perched atop his head gave him the air of a man looking for trouble, or maybe just for someone to control. His younger partner, Malik, shifted awkwardly beside him. "Clint," Malik said, lowering his voice, "she's just standing there." Clint's lip curled. Not just standing, loitering. Every damn week, it's the same. Hanging outside luxury stores, acting like she belongs. He didn't wait for a reply. Boots thudding against the tile, Clint marched toward Kendra like a lawman from a Western showdown. When she noticed him approaching, she offered a polite smile, expecting maybe a routine inquiry or someone needing directions. Instead, Clint's voice cut through the ambient mall chatter like a siren. "Ma'am," he barked, loud and firm, "this is a commercial zone. No standing unless you're conducting business." Kendra blinked, surprised. "I'm picking up an order. Virelli's. 5:30. She tilted her phone toward him, the confirmation email clear on the screen. "You can check if you'd like." Clint didn't even glance at it. "Doesn't matter. You're not shopping right now. You're standing, not buying. That's loitering. We've had complaints." Around them, foot traffic slowed. Shoppers instinctively sensed conflict. Some reached for their phones. Others kept walking but looked back over their shoulders. Kendra's brows knit in confusion. "I've done nothing wrong," she said, voice calm but quivering. "You don't decide that," Clint said. "You need to move now." Kendra stood straighter. "I will, as soon as they open the door. I'm 2 minutes early." Clint reached for his radio, pressing the button with dramatic flair. "Dispatch, potential trespasser outside Varelli's. Black female, early 40s, non-compliant." Kendra took a step back, startled. "That's not true. I've shown you my order." Clint stepped forward. "You've got two options. Move or be removed." "I'm not trespassing," Kendra insisted. Clint snapped his fingers. "Malik, bring the cuffs." "What?" Kendra's voice cracked. The horror wasn't in being accused. It was in how quickly it was happening, how unstoppable it felt. Malik hesitated. "Clint, I don't think this." "Now," Clint snapped. Kendra shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "Please. This is a mistake. I didn't do anything." But it was already over. The cuffs clicked around her wrists. Cold. Final. The sound seemed to silence the entire concourse. A child asked his mother what was happening. A teenage girl whispered. She didn't even resist. Clint gripped Kendra's arm firmly, leading her away. "Next time, think twice before loitering where you don't belong." A clerk from Varelli's stepped outside, eyes wide. "Is something wrong?" she asked nervously. This woman was lingering outside. Suspicious behavior, Clint said. Kendra turned desperately. You processed my order. Yesterday. The Carter chronograph. Recognition flickered in the clerk's eyes, then faded as she looked at Clint. She nodded, but stepped back inside without another word. As they walked past storefronts, parents shielded their children's eyes. People whispered. A few recorded. One even laughed. Outside the main entrance, police cruisers had just arrived, called in by Clint. Kendra stood in the setting sun, tears streaking down her cheeks, wrists still in metal cuffs. Dignity crushed beneath boots and bureaucracy. Clint handed her over to the officers. She hadn't moved aggressively, and still, she had been treated like a criminal. The officers in the front said nothing. They hadn't asked her name. They hadn't even asked what happened. She looked at the glass partition that separated her from them, realizing with sick clarity that to them, the details didn't matter. By the time they pulled into the small security station at the far end of the mall complex, Clint was already waiting outside, arms crossed, smugness painted across his face. Malik stood behind him, expression unreadable. A uniformed officer opened the door and gestured for Kendra to step out. She did, stiffly, her coat wrinkled, dignity crumpled. They walked her into a holding room meant for shoplifters and vandals, a harshly lit, windowless space with 2 metal chairs and a table bolted to the ground. She was told to sit. They didn't uncuff her. Instead, Clint entered behind her with a clipboard and a smirk, setting it down dramatically before taking the seat opposite her. Ms. Mayfield, he began, emphasizing the name as if it were already on a police report. According to reports, you were behaving suspiciously near Varelli's, loitering for an extended time. Several customers felt uncomfortable. Kendra stared at him. That's a lie. I was there for 3 minutes. I showed you my order confirmation. Clint shrugged, eyes gleaming. That's not what the store said. I just got off the phone with their manager. Kendra blinked, stunned. What manager? Dominic Keene, Clint said with theatrical calm. Said you've been there more than once, always standing near the entrance, not buying. Made his staff uneasy. Her stomach dropped. She remembered Dominic, a pale, wiry man in expensive glasses who rarely looked people in the eye. They had exchanged pleasantries once when she made her deposit. Apparently, that was enough to decide who she was. He's lying, she whispered. He knows I have an order ready today. Check your footage. I didn't even go in. Clint didn't flinch. I don't need to. His word is enough for me. Kendra leaned forward slightly, voice steady but tight. So that's it? A false claim and suddenly I'm a threat. Clint gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're making this more difficult than it has to be. A knock on the door interrupted them. One of the officers opened it and stepped in. She's clear, he said casually. No prayers. Lives in the city, works at a tech firm downtown. Seems clean. She still violated mall policy, Clint said quickly, standing. She refused to leave when told. That's trespassing. We're not pressing charges, the officer replied. We'll just escort her off the premises. Kendra's head turned sharply. That's it? You're not even going to ask me what happened? The officer blinked at her, caught off guard. Ma'am, the report says, I don't care about the report, she snapped, the anger breaking through. You didn't ask me anything. You took his word, and now you're throwing me out like trash. What exactly do you think I did? There was silence in the room. Clint crossed his arms, smirking again. The officer's expression shifted, but not enough. He gestured to Malik. Uncuff her. Malik stepped forward, slowly removing the cuffs from her wrists. Kendra winced as the metal pulled against sore skin. She stood, rolling her wrists, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry again. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the vibration relentless. She reached for it, saw nearly 50 notifications, and felt her pulse quicken. Her name was trending. The video had gone viral. Someone in the crowd had captured the entire scene. Clint accusing her, the cuffs, the officers leading her away. It had been uploaded to multiple platforms, edited with dramatic music, and already racked up thousands of comments. Kendra hesitated, then tapped to read them. Her stomach twisted. Why didn't she just move? Always playing the victim card. Mall security doing their job. Stop making everything about race. The ones defending her were buried under sarcasm and cruelty. Her calm demeanor, her lack of resistance, none of it mattered. People had made up their minds. The footage, taken out of context, had become a circus. She dropped the phone, her hands trembling. She didn't deserve this. She had done nothing wrong. But the internet didn't care about right and wrong. It cared about spectacle. Her inbox was flooded with emails from strangers. Some were threats. Others were thinly veiled insults pretending to be questions. Did you actually have a receipt? Why were you really there? Then came the email from HR, subject line, urgent administrative review. Her chest tightened as she opened it. Dear Ms. Mayfield, due to the recent videos circulating on social media involving a public incident, we are placing you on temporary administrative leave, effective immediately. This is a standard response to incidents that may affect public perception and company reputation. We will be in touch. She read the message 3 times, each time slower than the last. Her company hadn't asked for her side either. They hadn't called to check on her. No one had asked what happened. They just saw a viral clip and treated her like a liability. She was a respected project lead, praised in her last review, now quietly shoved aside. Her job wasn't guaranteed. Her reputation, her career, everything she'd built, it was all now on pause. She sat on the edge of her bed, eyes unfocused, mouth dry. Outside her window, the world moved on. Cars passed. People walked dogs. Birds chirped. Inside, time froze. The phone buzzed again. A journalist from a local outlet wanted an interview. Would love your perspective, the message read. But fair warning, we plan to include mall security's official statement. She didn't respond. What was the point? She wasn't ready to be dissected by the same public that had already crucified her. Later that day, a neighbor she barely knew knocked at her door. Saw you on the news, he said with an awkward smile. Crazy stuff. They said you were resisting. She shut the door without answering. Then came the text from her cousin in Atlanta. You okay? Want me to fly in? She typed and deleted her reply 4 times before finally settling on. I'm fine. Just tired. But she wasn't fine. She was unraveling. The bruises on her wrists were already fading, but the bruises on her pride, her sense of self, they were just beginning to form. A few people she knew texted words of support, but it felt performative, empty. One colleague added, just let it blow over, as if silence would wash it all away. Kendra walked into her living room, stared at the unopened box from Varelli's still sitting by her door. The watch she had waited for, the gift to herself for a promotion she now wasn't sure she still had, was inside. She hadn't even unwrapped it. She didn't feel like she deserved it anymore. That was the most painful part, not what they did to her, but how they made her question herself, question her belonging, her worth. By evening, a conservative talk show had picked up the story, spinning it into a rant about false claims of discrimination and personal responsibility. They showed the video with aggressive commentary, twisting every second. The footage may have gone viral, but the people who mattered to Clint, the mall management, his security team, and the private executive board, had all nodded in approval. They didn't say it directly, but he heard it loud and clear in their language. Good instincts. Right call. Professional handling. Over coffee in the break room, Clint leaned back in his chair, grinning as he replayed the video for the 6th time on his phone. The freeze frame of Kendra being cuffed while looking stunned and helpless became his favorite part. She really thought she belonged here, he said to Malik, who stood stiffly by the microwave. You give someone a corporate job and a designer coat, and suddenly they think they're royalty. Malik didn't respond. He hadn't spoken much since the day of the arrest. But Clint didn't need his agreement. He was reveling in the narrative that had been carefully crafted and quickly adopted by those in charge. I told them she'd been hanging around too much, Clint continued. Better to act early, before something bad happens. You know how it goes. He didn't see the irony in what he was saying. To him, suspicion was a matter of gut feeling, not evidence. And his gut was always aimed at the same kind of target. Later that afternoon, in a private meeting inside the mall's administrative wing, the board convened without fanfare or formality. The room was filled with men in suits and a few women, all flipping through printed incident reports and PR risk assessments. No one invited Kendra. No one sought clarification. Clint had already submitted his version of events, supported by a two-line statement from Dominic Keene, the boutique manager who claimed Kendra's behavior had alarmed his staff. There were no video reviews, no alternate testimonies, just an internal memo warning that individuals who create public disturbances may endanger brand partnerships and customer perception. With little discussion, the decision was unanimous. A no trespass order would be issued immediately, formally banning Kendra Mayfield from Hamilton Ridge Mall and all its affiliated properties. If she returned, she would be considered a threat and subject to arrest. The order was signed, stamped, and delivered to the mall security desk by the end of the day. Clint took particular pride in hand-delivering the notice to the precinct for record. "She's done here," he told the desk sergeant with a smirk. "If she shows her face again, we'll be ready." That evening, Kendra received the envelope. No personal call, no prior warning. Just a cold piece of paper slid under her apartment door in a nondescript folder. Her name was printed at the top in bold letters, followed by a statement informing her she was permanently banned from Hamilton Ridge Mall for violating property conduct and creating a public disturbance. Her breath caught. Her first instinct was disbelief, then outrage, then, worse than both, defeat. It was happening again. They were sealing her out without a voice. Not only had she been stripped of dignity in public, not only was she suspended from her job, but now she was officially blacklisted from a place where she had shopped for years. Her purchases meant nothing. Her professionalism meant nothing. Her existence had been written off by a single accusation and a group of strangers who had never met her. The paper in her hand might as well have been a wall. She folded it slowly and placed it on her kitchen table, sitting down across from it like she was staring at an opponent in a game she didn't know how to play. She thought about fighting it, thought about calling a lawyer, but she didn't have the energy. Not yet. Outside, her phone buzzed again. This time it was her team lead from work. The message was short and careful. "Just checking in. HR said you're taking time to reflect. Let us know if you need anything." The walls echoed too loudly, the air too heavy. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. That morning, a soft knock at the door startled her. Expecting a delivery, she opened it cautiously and found an envelope taped to the frame. No return address, no label, just her name printed neatly on the front. She stepped back inside and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a formal notice from the management company of her apartment complex. Termination of lease. 30 days notice to vacate the premises, citing ongoing disruptions to community harmony and safety concerns. Her blood ran cold. There had been no disruptions, no complaints. She paid rent early, never threw loud parties, barely interacted with her neighbors. She read the letter again, looking for a reason that made sense, but it was vague and mechanical. The kind of language people use when they want to hide something. Her first thought was to call the office and demand an explanation, but something in her gut held her back. Instead, she dug through her files, found her lease agreement, and scanned the fine print. The name of the property owner jumped out at her, Darren Dobson. The surname hit like a brick. Clint's last name. A cold realization bloomed in her chest. She dropped into the chair at her kitchen table, the eviction notice crumpling in her hand. This wasn't a coincidence. This was deliberate. She thought about the way Clint had looked at her during the confrontation, not with suspicion, but with ownership, like she was a problem he'd decided to erase. Now it made sense. He hadn't just wanted her gone from the mall. He wanted her gone from everywhere. And he had the connections to make happen. Kendra clenched her fists, jaw tight. This wasn't random. This was a calculated purge. She could see it now, the network of small-town power that stretched quietly between law enforcement, property owners, mall boards, and security professionals like Clint. They called it policy. They called it procedure. But it was really just fear disguised as control. Clint had used his badge at the mall to frame her as a threat. Now he was using family ties to push her out of her home. The fact that no one questioned it made it worse. No one challenged the narrative. Not her employer, not her neighbors, not even the building management who had smiled at her for 2 years and now wouldn't return her calls. She emailed the leasing office anyway, demanding a copy of the complaint file. There was no response. She called the front desk. The receptionist stumbled over her words and finally admitted the decision came from the owner directly. "Mr. Dobson said it's non-negotiable," she said, voice barely a whisper. Kendra closed her eyes and took a slow breath. They were closing her out of her own life like she was a bad dream they wanted to forget. Her job was in limbo, her reputation poisoned, and now her home was being stripped away under the guise of policy. She started packing boxes that evening, not because she accepted it, but because she had to be prepared. Every object she wrapped, photo frames, books, kitchen utensils, felt like an admission that she was being erased. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a former coworker who hadn't reached out since the suspension. "Hey," the message read. "Heard about the eviction. Sorry, this is crazy. Let me know if you need anything." She didn't respond. Sorry wasn't going to undo what was happening. What she needed was truth. Proof. Something to hold up against this storm of lies. And then she remembered something. During one of their rare neighborly chats, the woman down the hall, Mrs. Holtz, had mentioned her husband once did contract repairs for the Dobsons' properties. Kendra knocked on her door that night. The older woman opened it, startled. "Kendra, dear, are you all right?" She hadn't slept in her bed in 2 nights, instead curling up on the living room couch where the dim glow of late-night news and social media commentary flickered across her tired eyes. The eviction was real. The job suspension remained. And her reputation, at least in the circles that once embraced her, had become radioactive. What stunned her most wasn't just the loss, but how quickly her life had collapsed under the weight of one false narrative. How swiftly people distanced themselves, as if her misfortune was contagious. When she stepped out for groceries that morning, she decided to stop by Archer's Market, a local boutique store where she'd shopped for years. The cashier, Nora, usually greeted her by name, even set aside specialty items Kendra liked. But when she walked in, Nora didn't look up. She just gave a stiff nod and rang up the man ahead of her. Kendra approached with her usual basket, offering a subdued smile. "Hey, Nora," she said, trying for normalcy. Nora barely glanced at her. "Sorry, we're not serving you today." Kendra blinked, stunned. "Excuse me." "Owner's policy," Nora said quietly, then leaned in. "I shouldn't even be talking to you. They told us not to engage." Kendra stood frozen, the weight of her basket in one hand, her pride in the other. "Why?" she asked, though she already knew. Nora's eyes flicked to a security camera overhead. "Please just go, okay?" The words landed harder than expected. Kendra placed the basket down and left without another word. Outside, the street felt colder, the stares of strangers sharper. She moved quickly toward the bookstore around the corner, hoping it was just a misunderstanding, maybe an isolated incident. But there, too, the clerk looked past her like she was invisible. "Sorry, we're closed for private inventory," the clerk said, despite the store being filled with customers. Kendra left again, her chest tightening. She tried one last place, a coffee shop where she used to write on weekends. This time, no one even acknowledged her standing in line. When she reached the counter, the barista walked away without explanation. It was no longer a coincidence. Someone had poisoned the well. Everywhere she turned, familiar faces turned away. She returned to her apartment and sat in silence for nearly an hour before deciding to fight back. There had to be somewhere people would listen, somewhere official. She remembered the upcoming community board meeting at the local rec center. Open to residents, a platform for grievances and community updates. She had attended before. She knew the protocol. If she could speak publicly, maybe someone would listen. Maybe this would start to turn. That evening, she dressed carefully in a navy blazer and slacks, brushed her hair into a tight bun, and printed out documentation. Copies of her eviction notice, the trespass order, and her purchase confirmation from Borelli's. Facts, dates, evidence. She arrived 10 minutes early, sat quietly near the back of the rec center hall, and waited. But just as the board secretary began roll call, 2 private security guards entered the room. One of them pointed to her, leaned toward the chairperson, and whispered something. The chairperson looked up, then called across the room, "Ms. Mayfield, could you please step outside for a moment?" Kendra stood slowly, paper file clutched tight in her hand. As she exited the room, one of the guards stepped between her and the door. "I'm sorry, but you won't be allowed in tonight. This is a public meeting," she said firmly. "I'm a resident. I have every right to be here." The guard shook his head. "The board has concerns about your recent involvement in incidents that may be disruptive to public order." "What incidents?" she demanded. "The mall? The arrest that wasn't an arrest? The eviction?" "Ma'am, we don't decide policy," the second guard said. "We're just following instructions." "Whose instructions?" she pressed. The first guard hesitated. "Property management." That confirmed it. The same management company that handled the mall also had contracts across the district. Clint's influence reached farther than she'd feared. She stepped back, furious. "So now I'm a threat to public order for trying to speak?" Neither man responded. The morning was overcast, the clouds low and moody above the glass canopy, yet the moment radiated clarity and focus. Gone were the shadows under her eyes and the tremble in her voice. In their place was a commanding stillness, as if every indignity had crystallized into purpose. She wore a charcoal gray suit cut with precise angles, a silk blouse the color of steel, and heels that struck the floor with each step like punctuation marks. Her hair was pulled back into a tight chignon, her face calm, unreadable. In one hand, she carried a slim, black portfolio. Flanking her were 2 people. One, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. The other, a woman in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and dressed in corporate chic. Legal advisors, silent but imposing. They entered through the east wing of the mall, passing through the same corridor where Clint had publicly handcuffed her just days before. People noticed. Staff turned. Shoppers slowed. There was something about her presence that shifted the air, like a storm was about to hit, but no one could tell which direction it was coming from. Clint was stationed near the central atrium, his posture relaxed, chatting with a colleague while sipping coffee. When he looked up and saw her approaching, his face froze. The coffee cup paused midair. Kendra didn't flinch. She met his eyes without breaking stride, watching the confusion twist slowly into discomfort. He stepped toward her. "You're not allowed to be here," he said, a touch of his old authority returning as he glanced around, unsure. "There's a trespass order. You were banned." "That order," she said evenly, "was rescinded 2 hours ago. I suggest you check with your superiors." He opened his mouth, but before he could respond, the man beside Kendra spoke. "Mr. Dobson, my name is Alan Vickery. I represent the legal counsel for Duxton Equity Group. As of this morning, our client, Ms. Mayfield, is the primary representative of the ownership entity now holding majority control of Hamilton Ridge Mall." Clint blinked. "What?" "Ownership changed hands at 8:03 a.m., the woman on Kendra's other side added. "Your board has already been notified. A special meeting has been called for 10 a.m. in Conference Room B. Attendance is mandatory for all senior staff." Clint stammered, unable to find the thread of control he'd relied on so easily before. Kendra stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. "You should hurry, Clint. You don't want to be late to your own reckoning." Without waiting for a reply, she walked past him, her heels echoing through the atrium like judgment. Word of her arrival spread faster than wildfire. Within 20 minutes, the conference room was packed. Board members sat stiffly around a gleaming oak table, faces pale and unsure. Clint lingered near the back, trying to look composed, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. When Kendra entered, the room fell silent. She didn't smile. She didn't pause for greetings. She placed the portfolio on the table, opened it, and began distributing documents. "As of this morning," she began, her voice even steady, Duxton Equity Group has acquired a controlling share in Hamilton Ridge Mall. I have been appointed lead representative of our interests here, effective immediately." Gasps, murmurs, and one audible curse rippled across the room. She continued, "As such, I'm here to inform you of immediate restructuring initiatives beginning today. These include the termination of contracts, policy reviews, and personnel audits related to recent misconduct." She turned and looked directly at Clint. "Starting with security." Clint took a step forward, voice cracking. "You can't, you'll be escorted from the property today," Kendra said coldly. "Your employment is terminated. Your abuse of authority, falsified reports, and discriminatory actions have been documented, investigated, and concluded." Kendra remained calm, poised, her hands resting lightly on the portfolio she had just used to dismantle the world he believed he controlled. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled a second folder from her case, opened it, and removed 2 crisp sheets of paper. She walked to the head of the table where the mall director, Gregory Bales, sat hunched in his chair, fingers fidgeting with the corner of his tablet. Without a word, she placed one of the sheets directly in front of him. It was an official notice of termination. His name appeared in bold at the top. "Effective immediately," she said. "You are relieved of your position due to misconduct, procedural negligence, and violation of civil ethics standards as determined by internal investigation." Gregory's face turned ashen. "You can't just—" "I can," she interrupted. "And I have." Before he could argue further, she turned and crossed the room to where Clint now stood frozen. She handed him the second sheet. He looked at it with shaking hands. His own eviction notice. But not from a residence, from every property managed by the newly acquired parent company, including the entire Hamilton Ridge complex. "As of today, you are not permitted on these premises or any of our affiliated locations," Kendra said firmly. "This is not a temporary ban. This is permanent. Any violation will result in legal action." Clint's face went red, not just with anger, but with humiliation. The man who had once dragged her out of this building in cuffs now stood cornered, paper in hand, powerless. Kendra didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice or indulge in theatrics. Her calm was more devastating than rage. "You tried to destroy me," she said quietly, her voice so steady it seemed rehearsed. "You weaponized a system that was designed to protect people like you, and you counted on silence to cover your cruelty. But I'm not silent." She turned to the room again. "None of us should be." One of the board members cleared his throat and stood. "Ms. Mayfield, Kendra, if I may, we would like to extend our formal apology on behalf of the former administration." "No," she said, holding up a hand. "Save it for your staff. Save it for the next woman who gets stared at too long or followed into a store. Apologies don't fix broken systems. Action does." She gathered her portfolio and stepped toward the door, but just as she reached for the handle, her assistant entered, phone in hand. "It's live," she said. Kendra nodded once, then faced the board one last time. "Effective today," she announced, "I am the new Chief Operating Officer for Vitrian Properties, the company now managing this entire mall portfolio. A press release has gone out nationally. Expect inquiries." The announcement dropped into the room like a bomb. No one moved. No one spoke. The press release, already spreading across media channels and business networks, featured Kendra's professional headshot and a bold headline. Vitrian Properties appoints Kendra Mayfield as new COO following historic acquisition and civil accountability review. Attached was a summary of her vision for inclusive policy, anti-discrimination reforms, and community-led redevelopment. The woman who had once been handcuffed for waiting outside a jewelry store was now leading the entire network that had enabled her persecution. As she exited the room, a quiet murmur began to rise behind her, questions, apologies, panicked emails being typed by executive assistants. But Kendra didn't look back. She walked the corridor she'd once been marched through in disgrace, now with absolute control. Staff who had avoided her eyes now stepped back respectfully. The very floor that had once reflected her humiliation now gleamed under her stride. Headlines didn't just focus on the leadership change. They focused on the story behind it, the injustice that led to it, and the woman who had turned humiliation into revolution. Kendra's name became synonymous with accountability. Social media, which had once mocked her, now rallied behind her. People who had shared the viral video of her public arrest now posted it again with captions of support, of apology, of awe. But while praise flowed in Kendra's direction, the tide turned viciously against Clint. The same video that had been weaponized against her was now used as evidence of his abuse of authority. News outlets aired slow-motion breakdowns of the encounter, dissecting every moment of his escalation, every lie he had promoted. Civil rights attorneys began to call the incident what it truly was: racial profiling, unlawful detainment, abuse of private security authority. Within a week, Clint received official notice that he was being sued for defamation, wrongful conduct, and unlawful interference with personal freedom. The lawsuit, backed by Vitrian Properties and Kendra herself, included charges that directly tied his manipulation of public systems to her professional and personal damages. But even before the case saw a courtroom, the industry turned cold. Clint's certification with the state's private security board was revoked, citing gross misconduct and ethical violations. Companies he had previously worked with, subcontractors and clients who once hailed him as reliable, now issued public statements condemning his actions. He was effectively blacklisted. Job applications went unanswered. His name carried a weight that closed doors before he could knock. The man who once strutted through Hamilton Ridge like he owned it now found himself without employment, without title, and without anyone willing to defend him. Meanwhile, the mall's executive board, those who had voted unanimously to ban Kendra without a hearing, found themselves under new scrutiny. Vitrian's internal compliance division initiated a full audit, revealing a culture of silence and complicity. 3 board members resigned before official action could be taken. The remaining 4 were terminated for ethics violations. Their replacements were announced in a live-streamed press conference led by Kendra, who didn't gloat but instead focused on the path forward. "This isn't about punishment," she said, standing behind a podium set just inside the very same mall that once threw her out. "It's about change. Real, measurable change that ensures what happened to me never happens again." That change came swiftly. Kendra instituted a racial equity policy across all Vitrian-managed properties, mandating bias training, complaint transparency, and the establishment of oversight committees composed of community members, not just executives. Every store in Hamilton Ridge received a mandatory policy packet outlining new standards. Any business that failed to comply would face a non-renewal of lease. Some pushed back, but most understood the message. The age of silence was over. Public pressure intensified. Stores that had previously looked away during Kendra's arrest began issuing public apologies. Varelli's Fine Jewelers, the boutique at the center of it all, released a statement acknowledging their complicity and pledging contributions to racial justice programs. Their manager, Dominic Keene, was quietly removed. Even Archer's Market and the coffee shop that refused to serve her released letters of regret, not just to Kendra, but to their communities. But Kendra didn't accept apologies with open arms. She demanded accountability. Each apology came with an agreement to sponsor diversity outreach programs and implement hiring practices that reflected the communities they served. Her terms were non-negotiable. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was building a system where justice lived in policy, not just in sentiment. In meetings with her new executive team, Kendra emphasized impact over optics. "I don't want sympathy," she told them. "I want structure. I want data. I want results we can measure and replicate." Her leadership was firm, visionary, unrelenting. Former colleagues who had once distanced themselves began reaching out again, but Kendra was selective with her trust. She remembered who stayed silent. She remembered who watched. She forgave but didn't forget. The community responded. Residents began to show up for board meetings, no longer turned away, no longer afraid to speak. Flyers advertising open forums were distributed in multiple languages. Anonymous feedback systems were installed at mall entrances. People felt heard. They felt seen. They felt safe. Kendra walked the property every day now, not for optics, but to observe, to connect. She spoke with janitors, baristas, security, recruits undergoing new training. Every face she met reminded her of who she had been and who she had become. It had been 6 months since Kendra Mayfield stood at that podium in Hamilton Ridge Mall and declared a new era of leadership. 6 months since the systems that once oppressed her were dismantled under the weight of her will and rebuilt with purpose, transparency, and justice. The reforms she implemented were no longer just statements in a press release. They had evolved into policy, practice, and culture. The security force was retrained, community councils were active and vocal, and every employee at Vitrian Properties underwent quarterly equity evaluations. Public trust had not only been restored, it was thriving. Businesses that once hesitated now flourished under the new inclusive structure, and customers of all backgrounds felt welcomed and safe. Kendra had become more than a COO. She was a symbol of perseverance reshaped into power, a reminder that integrity and strength could rise from even the deepest humiliation. Yet for all the victories, she remained grounded. She never stopped walking the mall floor, never stopped asking the janitors how their kids were doing, never stopped listening to the customers whose voices were long ignored. She launched the Mayfield Equity Foundation, a nonprofit focused on restoring dignity to those silenced by systemic injustice. It funded legal assistance, mental health care, job training, and educational scholarships. Its headquarters were built on the edge of the same neighborhood where she had once been denied service and evicted without cause. Inside its glass walls, community members found more than help, they found hope. One late autumn morning, just as the leaves turned brittle and golden, Kendra arrived early at the foundation center. The parking lot was quiet, the sunrise casting long shadows across the pavement. She stepped out of her car, briefcase in hand, already preparing for a full day of meetings. But as she approached the entrance, she saw something that made her pause. A man in a faded flannel shirt and worn jeans was sweeping leaves from the sidewalk, his movements slow but methodical. His back was slightly hunched, and a knit cap shadowed his face, but there was something familiar in his posture, something hesitant yet deliberate. She stepped closer. The man looked up. It was Clint Dobson, the same man who once humiliated her, who orchestrated her fall with smug authority and prejudice. But this Clint looked different. His shoulders weren't squared with false pride. His eyes didn't carry entitlement. They carried fatigue, shame, a silent question. He froze when he saw her. Broom paused mid-sweep. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, neither speaking. The tension that once boiled between them now settled into something quieter, heavier, human. He cleared his throat, then looked down. "I didn't think you'd be here this early," he said quietly. "They told me I could help before the place opened. Figured it was something I could do." Kendra watched him closely, noting the change not just in words, but in tone, in presence. He wasn't performing. He wasn't groveling. He was trying. "You work here?" she asked, her voice even. "No," he said quickly. "Just volunteer sometimes." "I needed something to do." "I thought," he trailed off. "It doesn't matter." She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Why here?" He exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding the answer too long. "Because this place stands for everything I never understood. Because I can't undo what I did, but I can show up. Maybe make something a little better. I don't expect anything from anyone, least of all you." Silence hung again between them. Clint lowered his eyes. "I was wrong," he said, barely above a whisper. "About everything." Kendra's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with the weight of what this moment meant. She had imagined facing him again, imagined fury, imagined justice, served cold and final. But standing here now, seeing what he had become, she realized justice didn't have to be about vengeance. It could be about choice. She looked at the man before her, not the guard who once cuffed her, but the man who now picked up trash outside a building born of her pain and her purpose. She took a breath, stepped past him, then paused. Without turning, she said clearly, "Real power is knowing when to forgive, Clint." And with that, she walked into the building, the doors sliding open to greet her. Inside, the day would continue, plans, meetings, voices rising in optimism. But outside on that quiet sidewalk, a man who once believed power was control now understood it could be something else entirely. Forgiveness wasn't surrender. It was transformation. Kendra had taken her trauma and turned it into an engine of change. She had suffered, she had been broken, and yet she had chosen to rebuild not just the structures that failed her, but the humanity of those who had wronged her. Her story wasn't just about victory. It was about meaning. It was about using injustice as a blueprint for reform, about finding strength not in destruction, but in creation. As the sun climbed higher and the city stirred awake, Kendra sat at her desk overlooking the courtyard of the Mayfield Equity Foundation. Volunteers moved with purpose. Visitors checked in. Children laughed in the community library downstairs. And outside, Clint kept sweeping, the sidewalk slowly clearing beneath his broom, each stroke an act of quiet redemption. The end. If you're still with us after that final chapter, thank you for following the journey. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more gripping narratives like this, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps support future content. What did you think about the plot? Were you surprised by Kendra's rise and Clint's redemption? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, tell us, where in the world are you watching or reading from? Drop a comment and let us know. Your feedback helps shape what comes next.